Good afternoon. I use my powwow voice to get everybody's attention. Okay. Halito. Sahachifa tatapishi kan transpo chebachi hoyo micha chata si hoke. Micha yokoke okla pescada we konoi. Micha yokoke okla nakochatunk. Good afternoon. My name's Karina Walters. I'm enrolled in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about a land acknowledgement, and then we will turn it over to our great guest speaker. But first I want to just acknowledge I'm here as a Choctaw woman and a social work scholar. And I'm speaking from my heart and not on behalf of my new employer, the National Institutes of Health, or the federal government. I now have to make these disclaimers. It's weird being a Fed. So anyways, I direct the Tribal Health Research Office here in the area and at the NIH, and I'm happy to talk with you during the next 4 days about what that means and how you can get connected to Native research at the NIH and other research at the NIH. But anyways, I was invited to give a land acknowledgement to start this conference in a good way, and I want to first say there is a difference between a Native person giving an acknowledgement versus a non-Native person acknowledging the land that they're in. And certainly even more of a difference when you have a tribal member from that territory come and give a land acknowledgement, because they don't need to give a land acknowledgement, the land already knows them. So there are differences. So I can tell you for sure what land acknowledgements are not. They are not about assuaging guilt and accountability for past and present harms and transgressions, nor are they about skirting around responsibilities to action. So for Native people, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about my tribe. For us, and at least from a Choctaw perspective, in our ancestral traditions, it's about truly seeing someone. When we greet each other, we say halito, and I said halito to you. Halito in our language is just a short version of the word halitopa, which means sacred. So when we greet each other and when we come to someone's new territory, we say halito because we're saying, I see the sacred in you, and you see the sacred in me. It's about honoring when Indigenous people go to new territories. It's about respect. It's about understanding the sacred connection that the people we're stepping into, whose territory it is, that they have, since time immemorial, a tie to that place, and that creator and the sacred is within that place, and that is about their connection to that, and that we need to honor that. So it's about recognizing the sanctity of ties to place, the relationship between creator and people, and acknowledging that connection and asking, may we step in and be good relatives with you. That's what we do. Those are our protocols, and there's many rituals for that. Even in ancient times, it was actually the Choctaw women. We were the ones who greeted new people when they were coming into our territory. We would meet them to determine if they were safe, if they were here for good, if they had a good heart, if they were real. And once the women determined that they were safe and here for good purposes, they would escort them into the community, where if they were particularly important delegates, an eagle pipe that they cared for would be brought out, the women would sing over it, and then the leaders would then offer the pipe and smoke the pipe with the guests to the land, welcoming them to the land. Now that might seem like a really neat ritual, but it's very deep. Because what it is when you share that pipe and you smoke that pipe together, it's your breath and Creator's breath coming together, and that you're making that connection with them. And so now you're in a bond. You're making a relation when you do that. So in all of our traditions, we have different protocols to ask permission to come to shore, to territory, to place. And we have different ways of making that kin or family in these important interactions. Another example from my tribe back in the pre-mid-1700s, when we had the British and the French in our territory, and later Americans, when we wanted to make a positive relation with them and maybe create a treaty or something important like that, we would confer a title to them. We would actually make them a relation that way. And the title was usually Fanimiko. And Fanimiko translates to squirrel chief. We can go down a whole road on that one. And sometimes we'd even give them a pipe. And the reason we would give them a pipe was twofold. Again, recognizing the sacredness of the relationship, but also the responsibility they had to control their people and be in good relations with their people so that we can honor each other and respect each other's boundaries and relationships and keep from harming one another. Nevertheless, this practice became abandoned by the mid-1700s because the British and the Americans didn't understand that. And they really weren't there to make good relations, really, honestly, let's be real. It was really about dispossession and displacement and erasure from the land and place. And so that practice fell out of use because the sacred in the relationship wasn't there anymore. And so I asked today, how do we bring that sacred back to our relational ways of being to one another and building strong allied partnerships? So that brings me to the last part of this, is the second reason for land acknowledgement, especially for non-native peoples who are doing this work. It serves a different but yet related purpose. It's about making visible and articulating the wrongs, the harms, and remembering and recognizing and reflecting and possibly having restitution, reparations, other kinds of ways to make the relationship right again. It's about taking action. So land acknowledgement recognizes the historical and contemporary relationship among indigenous peoples in their native lands. And for our allies, when allies make these acknowledgements, it's really about making visible and acknowledging the past and present harms, enslavement, or erasure. It's an important opportunity to reflect on the dispossession and displacement faced by indigenous peoples now and in the past, and all of the resilience and all the beauty and all the activism done to ensure the continuance of indigenous culture and community that exists today. It's a promise. Land acknowledgement is a promise to take action. And it also gives us hope for a new and helpful relationships in place with community. So turning to the land we're in now, we're in the land of the Piscataway people, a Piscataway chiefdom. As a matter of fact, just 4 miles down the road is where Nakutachunk village stayed, that was present there. It's known as a place of trading. It was a great place where all tribes came together to trade. And also there were, just to kind of be more correct in it, Nakutachunk became absorbed into a lot of Piscataway people, so a lot of Piscataway descendants have Nakutachunk ancestry. And we also have bordering this area, the Pamunkey peoples as well. Before the arrival of Europeans, the Piscataway were one of the predominant indigenous groups living on the tributaries here of the Chesapeake Bay. They made up several small bands living through what is now Washington, D.C., southern Maryland, and parts of going up the Potomac River and this general area. The U.S. Capitol now is surrounded by just over a dozen tribal nations that thrive along the Anacostia and Potomac River watersheds and the Chesapeake Bay area in the states of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and Washington. It's called the DMV in this area, and I was very confused for a very long time because I thought it was the Department of Motor Vehicles. So, no, that's what they, so if you hear DMV, that's what they mean. So I just wanted to share with you an ally, Reverend Rebecca Savage. She's a Unitarian Universalist reverend for the congregation in Rockville, and she's African American. And for me, what she shares, her words are really true allyship around land acknowledgements. And she says this, these are her words. "This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Living into the words of our covenant to seek truth in love, we remember this day that the buildings of this gathering rest on land that has been home to the member tribes of the Piscataway Konai people for thousands of years. We remember the violations of sovereignty of territory and water perpetrated by invaders of the Piscataway people. We remember that this weekly acknowledgement cannot undo the harm that was done, nor the harm that continues to be done today. We remember the people of color of enslaved African labor in particular who worked this land without choice or reward. We remember that the economic progress of Maryland and of this country is a result of unpaid labor and forced servitude, a collective moral failure that persists in the soul of the nation today. We remember all those who are central to the history of this land, but who have been marginalized in the telling of that history, and who are often denied the gifts this nation has to offer. And we remember that no nation, no state, no congregation, no person is defined by their worst actions. As a person of the global majority and as a person of color, I also offer thanks and gratitude for the resilience, strength, and hope that carried my ancestors through. May their dreams be our prayer. With humility and grace as our guide, may we continue to live our lives, our values, beyond just words. And so then in closing, I'd like to share with you a quote from Gabrielle Tayek. She's a Piscataway scholar, and she says, just to remember this, you're always part of a larger story. You are rarely, if ever, going into another place where no one has ever been. Miss Butler, another member of the Piscataway, says, quote, as most Indian communities, we follow the lineage of the mother. We are the lineage of our first mother, Mother Earth, and we stand upon the river of life, the Anacostia, the Potomac rivers that flows to the mother of the big waters, the Chesapeake Bay. This is where we are and who we are. Welcome to Piscataway territory, where the waters blend as we flow together as one. So just as we stand just 4 miles from the town of traders, we also stand right here in the place where the waters converge and become one. So let us go forward and do good work this week. Trade in our intellect and in our good spirit, and as a Piscataway, blend and become one of heart, mind, and in service to others for a more healthful and just society. In Piscataway, they say, Nulele tum el paik. I am glad you all came. And so I just want to close with just a couple of verses, a brief part of a song, just to pay honor and respect to the Piscataway people and all indigenous peoples of this land, indigenous peoples of the lands all over as well. So if you can rise, or you could sit, or rise in spirit and stay seated, that's fine. It's an honor song. Hey oh, 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 oh hey, Yahweh, oh hey, oh hey, Yahweh, oh hey, hey oh, hey Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walters. Good evening, members and friends of the Society for Social Work and Research, and welcome to the 2024 Annual Conference. This is the 28th time we have gathered as social work scholars and the 30th anniversary of our organization. I'm Kirk Foster, your SSWR Vice President and Conference Chairperson. I bring you greetings from the School of Social Work at East Carolina University, where I'm currently director, and the School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Arlington, where I will soon, in 3 short weeks, be dean. Yeah, right? Craziness. I'm excited to see you all here, and I'm excited for the next several days together. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank everyone who's devoted significant time and energy into making this conference a success. I guess this is sort of my Golden Globes moment, I'm not sure. I am a fan of the awards season. To Jennifer, DJ, and Kristen, our SWR staff, to Mary Omer, Vice President-elect, who was responsible for this morning's workshops, David Pate, Social Policy Chair, who has worked tirelessly on the Social Policy Forum and other things. Sean Joe, SWR President, who will bring you greetings in a few moments. And our cluster chairs, who pour through abstract reviews and make critical decisions, right? So who in here is a cluster co-chair, right? So there are some of you in here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You make critical decisions, and all of you who volunteer many hours to review abstracts. Who in here reviewed abstracts this year? Yeah, and there are many more of you out there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My deepest appreciation for you and all of your contributions. We certainly could not do this conference without you. I look forward to this conference each year, to gather with friends from far and wide, to be challenged by thought leaders, and to be fed by the amazing scholarship our profession brings to the world. I hope you make the most of your time here. We have a couple of speakers for you tonight. Tonight we opened by acknowledging the native lands and the peoples who occupy this land upon which we stand and upon which this city is built. Tonight, we also acknowledge and honor for the first time in SWR conference history the enslaved persons whose hands and labor built this city and many of the cities that we call home. As I walked the halls today of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I was reminded that in the land of the free and the home of the brave, freedom and bravery are not mutually occurring conditions. That while we have made progress on the long road to freedom, there is progress, immense progress, yet to be made. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis, historian, professor, and mentor, who is an expert on African American and public history and culture. Last year, Howard University awarded her a Doctor of Humane Letters degree for her pioneering work on the history of the United States through the lens of the African American experience. For 3 decades, she has taught at Howard University, where she has served as director of the Public History Program and the director of Graduate Studies. Prior to joining the faculty at Howard University, she served as professor at Penn State University, George Washington University, and the Northern Virginia Community College. A founder of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Association, she has authored or co-authored 8 books, including 50 Years of Hip Hop at Howard University, First Freed, Emancipation in the District of Columbia, Living In, Living Out, African American Women and Migration to Washington, D.C. This work had an end, the transition from live-in to day work, and Emerging Voices and Paradigms, Black Women's Scholarship Today. With Stanley Nelson Jr., she co-produced the PBS documentary Freedom Bags and won the Oscar Michaud Award for the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame. Dr. Clark Lewis is an historian with a passionate commitment and dedication to creating a legacy of multi-layered factual historical scholarship that destroys the myths and stereotypes about African Americans and the details their infinite contributions to the history of the United States and world civilizations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis.
Thank you. I really do say thanks because finally I'm talking before a group of people who understand, or as they say, they get me. As a historian, as I said, for once I'm speaking in front of people who understand my passion for research, and in particular who have a respect for migration and migration moving culture with them. I know that some of you are familiar with my work, especially the work that deals with women who came from the rural South before 1930, especially to Washington. I begin, and I must always say, that I started this as an undergraduate at Howard. And I began because I had this strong sense of interest in understanding the lives of 4 of my relatives who were part of a family of 33 children who came from the rural South, many of them to Washington. They were the children of enslaved parents. Now, my professors at Howard were tolerant, and they always encouraged me to verify everything that I was hearing from these individuals. Please remember, this was almost 7 years before Roots, so oral history was sketchy at best. But they always insisted that I would have to verify these oral traditions and oral testimonies with the records, the real history. Wrong. In the records, they had this individual named Peyton, who was the father of these individuals. His age was always wrong. His wife's age and place of birth was always incorrect. And that was important because Peyton had 3 wives, and his 3rd wife was so much younger, he had 5 children older than that 3rd wife. Don't talk about my family. Most of all, the records had Winnie as his daughter, when in fact Winnie was his mother. And more I learned that when I would go to the records, I would go to them and get it correct. More and more, the records were wrong also on the lives of these young women who came to Washington. And I'm not going to call the name of the vaulted and established scholar who looked at women and migration. And when she did include women, she insisted that the vast majority of women, particularly African American women, came as older women. In fact, most came that I interviewed, and I ended up interviewing about 86 women and another 10 men. But they had come as very young women. Women generally, this scholar said, came with males, older males, or husbands generally, That in fact, most of the women I interviewed came, they were young and single. Very importantly, when we talk about individuals, we really see that they worked almost immediately, the record said, when in fact there was a whole year almost of anticipatory socialization, which thank goodness I'm in a group that says it's okay. They had to have that because they were country. Like my great aunts, they came, many of them had never lived in an urban setting. So it was important for them for almost a year to learn what life was like in an urban setting. Washington scholars, when they did, as I said, include African American women, they talked about, for example, the fact that when you talk about their economic base, they talked about their pay. Most of the women didn't know what they made early on because the oldest male had the money. You wouldn't dare give women, young women like that, money in their hand. They talked about them as being very dependent, when in fact they became very independent. Most of them had a side business. Like my great aunt, she was a well-known seamstress. And the one woman I interviewed that helped me understand everything with great clarity. She had a business, and what she did was, in the era that she was looking at, they all had liveries. And when you work for rich families, they wanted you in livery, in uniform. And she had a business, a thriving business, modifying the combs for the livery. See, my hair, when they bought and gave them the livery, that comb wouldn't sit in my hair if I had some. But she had a thriving business because she could modify the comb so that it could sit in African Americans' hair, so that they could then have the hair bonnet or this hair livery part, the hair part of the livery that the rich people insisted that they wear. When we talk about economics, it's very important to understand that they, in many ways, were not integrated into the obvious community. And for me, I learned they were not, therefore, outside of economics. They had their own economics. They had what we called penny savers clubs. Because of their work and the time they worked and the limits in many of their abilities to go to the bank, they couldn't bank. So the established studies said they weren't bankers. That's wrong. They had their own banks. And my great aunts, I was so horrible, I was so worrisome. She finally found that picture of the person she saved with. And she, of course, had a hat, gloves, and a beautiful tapestry coat. But most importantly for me, she was holding a book. I know that book was the information that she had of the women who saved with her. When we talk about politics in Washington, frequently this study talked about the fact that women were outside of politics, and particularly African American women. It's not true. They were very much involved in the politics, and particularly the leadership in church life. They were also leaders in their social capacities in civic organizations, and Washington had a fierce group of civic organizations. Almost every community had these vibrant civic organizations, and every block and section of the city had many of these migrant women in leadership positions. We talk about the personal lives of women in Washington, particularly African American women. I want you to understand they were not voiceless victims. When we talk about others who saw them, they far exceeded those external views of them and what they thought were their limitations. When we talk about them moving about the city, they always presented themselves, hats, gloves, outstanding outfits. When I was doing my dissertation at Maryland, this person he was done. He just kept saying, "I don't understand what you're doing." And I knew what I was doing. I figured it out. And he just was sort of along for the ride. And finally he said, "I just need some visuals." So I brought him some pictures of African American household workers. He couldn't believe what they looked like. I said, "But these don't look like workers. They wore hats and gloves." My great aunt was never seen after October without a fur. She was going to have fur, and she was so disappointed, not only with my hair and my presentation, but I didn't even have a mink coat, and she had 3. I'm saying this is a woman who was very clear on who she was, and she never accepted your projections of who she wasn't. They created their own social norms. They had the Thursday meetings because household workers are only off every other Thursday and one Sunday. So they had a vibrant group of Thursday, quote unquote, meetings. And when they retired, by the time my great aunt and others had stopped working for families, they had Saturday socials. And I can tell you, I would give her a ride. And finally I had enough sense to go in. I was astounded by the antiques and the lives that they had in their own social world. More importantly for me, I gained a new respect for my great aunt the more that I talked to her. I loved it. She could quote Emily Dickinson, Keats, Lord Byron, and her favorite, Longfellow. I always assumed she had extensive education. Finally, she admitted to me, like many people in her community, there was no school past the 3rd grade in that area of Virginia. You'd had to go to Hampton or up to Manassas. 33 children, no, they weren't going far. What she learned, and she showed me the technique, she worked for families that had what she called dull children. And she learned how to dust a table so she could stay in the room for hours, listening, passive education, so that she was learning from these tutors, quote, dull children. What I learned early on, and what has stayed with me, is that these women never articulated disillusionment for themselves or for me. I know that and because 9 out of 10 women in Washington were doing household service work, didn't matter if you had a college education or not, that was the only work open to you. 9 out of 10 women in Washington, D.C. are doing household service work. And I know that I and every other professional or non-professional, paraprofessional, or whatever we are, African Americans, we cross that bridge of bent backs. Those women cleaning and scrubbing floors made my life and my ability to move forward possible. In ending, I would remind you that these women created great service not only to this community, but from Midnight, Mississippi to Dayside, Virginia, they sent money home faithfully every month so that the families could be supported and continue to thrive or be sustained. They were competent as workers, but more importantly, as independent business people. It didn't matter what they did. They all had something they did outside of their established household service work, whether it was hair, the list is infinite, but they all were very capable and skilled. They had great dignity. They respected the worth of those who never respected them. And my great aunt left me a diary, and I was proud to show it to a colleague when I was at George Washington. And the colleague said, well, you can't use this. This is phonetic. Her words were so beautiful in that diary. Very importantly, she talked about how she could, quote, see the face of God in everybody, and how, therefore, it wouldn't ever tarnish her ability to have solid human relationships with everyone. Family, personal, and friendship lives and networks were critical to them in every aspect of their life. So in Washington, their work, their networks, for me, their social dynamics made this city the place that it is. And I'm so proud to be a part of that legacy, that long legacy of women and men who came here with little in their hands, but wonderful aspects of their home life in their hearts that they never forgot or abandoned. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Clark-Lewis, for your important words and for allowing us into your story. We now welcome to the podium SWR President, Dr. Sean Joe, to give a brief welcome.
Good evening, colleagues. As Kirk mentioned, I am only going to give a brief welcome. Again, I'm going to take this in for a second. You want to breathe it in.
Starting your workout.
So, as scholars, as you will see, AI will be a part of your life too. So I want to thank you and welcome to our annual conference. I was breathing in this opportunity to remind myself what an honor it is to serve as your president of the Society for Social Work and Research. I remember SWR in its second year, and again, as a young African-American scholar trying to figure out what is this thing called research, and how do you do it, and how do you do it well. It was pretty important that I was welcomed into a room that I was like, okay, I'm walking around the Alan Rubens and all the other giants of the field, and I said, okay, this is a space for me. I feel comfortable here. But I guess decades later, it's more than just comfort. We've contributed, we have expanded as an organization from about 200 people to, well, every year we oscillate between 2,100 to 2,400 scholars across the country, and we should be proud of that. So today I say thank you for being here. I'm excited about what you're about to experience. My colleagues have worked hard and have reached deep into their relationships to bring forth a lot of different presenters and symposiums to make sure that we have a good response to the breadth of interest in our membership across the many schools and countries that come together here at the Society for Social Work and Research. And for that, I am grateful, including our colleagues, Kirk, as well. So let me move forward before I get too excited up here. I haven't taught a class yet, so I don't want to stay too long. So as you're here in conference and going forward, aim high in your hopes, but in the works that you do. And as we begin to do that, we have a new generation of leadership that will be coming into view. We have had the results of the SWR election, and again, we have many as you begin to get to know them over the next couple of years. A new vice president-elect, Chris Hahn. We got a lot. I'm not going to be able to mention all of them, but new directors at large. I guess Joan, and Karen Bullock. Again, new student directors, for example, Fatima Mabrook. Again, we have a lot of new scholars stepping into this volunteer space to work on behalf of you, to make sure that we increase the benefit of SWR for you, and to make sure this is a place where we're really beginning to offer the solutions to complex social problems. So know, as my colleagues would tell you, that as we begin to acknowledge not only those who are coming into view to serve, but those who have lost. And again, I think we might have some of the names here. Again, to acknowledge that these have been our colleagues and they've contributed and they've been with us, helping to advance scholarship, hopefully to increase the life outcome and better opportunities for potential for every human being, to make sure they live a healthy and thriving life, to get this country to live up to its creed in many ways, and we've struggled to do that. So let's take a second to at least acknowledge the loss of some of our colleagues. And I will call out one in particular for me personally. You can call out one for yourself. Dr. Mildred Mitt Joyner, our dearly sister now who's working on our behalf spiritually, again, is giving countless years to her leadership at CSWE and ASW, and again, many other things. So if we can just take a brief moment just to think about our colleagues and hold them in our hearts. Thank you. So let me close here. In 2 years, it will be the 30th conference for SWR. I hope that you will take the opportunities to get fully engaged and make that the biggest celebration of social work science that we've ever had. Take your space in leadership. Do not hold back. We're at a critical time that our research and our scholarship is sorely needed. So let me leave you with the one word that everybody on the board knows that I tend to focus on. As I mentioned, that we have a brand new 2028 strategic directions for SWR. Find out what that's about. In the center of all of it is one word. The word is audacious. Let me say a little bit what my Siri reminds me that means. Audacious means to be recklessly brave, to move without restrictions to prior ideas, to be recklessly bold in defiance of convention, to be unrestrained. So as I do my work in scholarship, as this board set together to put forth a new strategic direction. In it, you'll see the push for us being audacious. It's no longer acceptable that we are schools of social work at outstanding institutions raising significant dollars, and the communities around us is roughly in the same condition, particularly the most vulnerable. If you find that acceptable, be well. But if you're engaging, at least those who know me, I'm going to push you to be recklessly brave and audacious. It's no longer acceptable that our science do not impact significantly population-level outcomes. It's no longer acceptable. You don't have to do population work, but you got to be motivated to say enough is enough. You live the life of the status quo. Think about being a little audacious in the next step. So with that, I say thank you, and Kirk, great conference. Go for it.
Thanks, Sean. All social work is community. I thought long and hard about the tone that I would like to set for our next few days together. The messages about community engagement and impact that I wanted to get across. The excitement I hope to build for the work that we share, and the space for fellowship that makes SWR important for many of us. Selecting a conference theme is hard work, y'all. Trust me. Our conference theme, Recentering and Democratizing Knowledge, is a call to action that aims to place the knowledge creation process squarely in the hands of the communities of people and the organizations that we serve. It's a reminder that we, as university-trained scholars, come to this work with great resources and experiences, as do the community members who partner with us in this great work. We are not alone, nor are we supremely important or central to the knowledge creation process. It's a reminder that the knowledge we co-create ought to be accessible to and usable by the people in making important policy and practice decisions that govern the lived experience of many. It is a reminder that in the midst of this co-creation is where we find the solutions to society's seemingly intractable problems. This is not to diminish our role or our skills in any way. It is, however, to recenter the work, to be in partnership. It is to acknowledge that the real power of our scholarship lies in the ability of it to make meaningful and sustainable change. It is ensuring knowledge is democratized. As social work scholars, I invite you to lead the way in these new models of research partnership, to bend the arc toward co-production, to challenge university systems that marginalize community members' roles as scholars, and open more doors that honor this hard and important work. All social work is community. Tonight we welcome the Reverend Traci Blackmon as our opening plenary speaker. Reverend Blackmon is an ordained minister, public theologian, and published author whose life work focuses on communal resistance to systemic injustice. Her own work epitomizes the importance of community-engaged knowledge and co-production. She served as denominational lead for justice and local church ministries in the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Pastor T, as many call her, has spent the last 3 decades preaching and teaching and living a theology that consistently and unapologetically calls community to hear the cries of the suffering in the world. Prior to her work as an ordained minister, Reverend Blackmon served the community as a licensed registered nurse with an emphasis in critical care and community health. As part of this work, she developed a mobile health unit program targeting underserved and uninsured populations for the largest healthcare system in St. Louis, Missouri. A native of Birmingham, Alabama, Reverend Blackmon is a distinguished alumnus of Birmingham Southern College, and she earned her Master of Divinity degree and an honorary doctorate from Eden Theological Seminary, where I too am a graduate and sit on the Board of Trustees. Reverend Blackmon is a co-author of the White Privilege Curriculum. Her impact has been felt around the globe, from the White House to the Carter Center to the Pontifical Council of the Vatican. She was appointed to the Ferguson Commission by Governor Jay Nixon of Missouri and to the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships for the White House by President Obama. Pastor T is the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions, including the White House Volunteer Service Award, the NAACP Rosa Parks Award, and the National Planned Parenthood Faith Leader Award. It gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome the Reverend Traci Blackmon as our opening speaker.
Good evening. There were quite a few heavy hitters up here before I even showed up, so I'm a little nervous. I thought I had it all under control and had the names of all the people I needed to call, but there are far too many. So I just want to acknowledge my invitation from you, Kirk. Thank you so very much for thinking of me. And in your leadership position, Dr. Joe, I want to acknowledge you as well, and all of those who are working with you here. Dr. Clark Lewis, your words have touched me deeply. I am a daughter of the South, raised a lot by my great-grandmother. So your story hits me in my heart. And very rarely do I speak anywhere without acknowledging her as the anchor of all that I do, Louise Madden Dorsey, who could only finish the 6th grade, but taught me more than anybody else I've ever met. Thank you for your work, and I will be purchasing your books. I also want to acknowledge that I am intimidated because I don't have a whole lot of heroes, but you are among them. There is not any element of my life that has not been touched by the work of social workers. Whether that's when I'm dealing with a child who has been abused or needs placement, or my work in domestic abuse shelters, or my work in the hospitals or in communities, or the work that came after the killing of Michael Brown Jr., or the work of getting masks and sanitizer into communities that were forgotten when COVID began. In every place, social workers have shown up. Whether they were social workers who worked in education systems, or in hospitals, or in the public square. In every instance, social workers have shown up, and not just with credentials, but with information, with connections, with details about families that made a difference. I honor you today. And I am incredibly grateful to be given the opportunity to speak before you this evening. East Africa is the homeland of the Maasai tribe, whose traditional greeting differs greatly from those most of us are accustomed to sharing. They do not ask each other, "How are you?" or "How is your day?" Their traditional greeting is Kasarian Angeri, translated as and how are the children? The Messiah asks about the children because they understand that responses to such questions as how are you are inadequate as measures of well-being. Within the tribal context, a return greeting of the children are well is indicative of the entire social ecosystem of the village being well. The children being well means the family is well, the land is well, and everything necessary to ensure the family's well-being is present. Dr. Felicia A. Hubbard, an internationally known psychologist and the director of the Well-Being Institute at the University of Cambridge, defines well-being as the combination of feeling good and functioning well. The experience of positive emotions such as happiness and contentment, as well as the development of one's potential, having some control over one's life, having sense of purpose and experiencing positive relationships. Well-being is more than the absence of illness or harm. It is a sustainable condition that allows the individual or population to develop and thrive. In light of such defining factors, the Maasai tribe's greeting takes on deeper meaning. The implication of such a question not only speaks to the health of those among us, but also to the well-being of the next generation and future generations to come. Multiple studies suggest, while wellness is not necessarily hereditary, generational health speaks to the well-being of our collective future and our ability as a society to progress and thrive. And so I pose this question among us this evening. Kasarian Ungeri, and how are the children? According to the Annie E. Casey Foundation's 2023 Kids Count data book, an annual assessment of child well-being in the US, our children, my friends, are not well. Since 1990, the Casey Foundation has ranked states annually in overall child well-being, using a prescribed set of indicators to capture what children need most to thrive in 4 key areas: economic stability, educational enrichment, health, wellness outcomes, and community and family support. The most recent data available, while not dismal in every area, reveals both severe problems and potential promise. Parents are less economically secure in recent years, and yet policy shifts implemented during COVID, like the child tax credit, staved off increased numbers of those living at or below the federal poverty levels. The pandemic erased decades of national progress made in 4th grade and reading and 8th grade math proficiency in public school education, while exposing the wide inequity in resourcing public schools to achieve the best outcome for all children. I don't know about here in DC or places where you live, but COVID showed us in St. Louis, Missouri, how little we were doing for some and how much we were doing for others. It did not matter that schools were sending home computers because many homes didn't have Wi-Fi connections. It did not matter that schools were closed. We had to find ways to open churches and resource centers so that children who depended on school to eat every day could still have a meal. On one side of town, grades were falling rapidly. And on another side of town, it was not unusual to have tutors and private teachers in the homes. In 2022, 74% of 8th graders were not proficient in math. There were also more young children who did not attend school at all. In one of our school districts, the Jennings School District, there was a superintendent in place at the time who understood social inequity. She understood that giving children all the same thing after generations of not having the same thing would not result in equal education. So in the Jennings School District, this superintendent decided to do something about that. She used vacant buildings to start clothes drives and food pantries on the site of the school. She made that available to families who needed it, and the pay was volunteer service hours in the school so that everyone could maintain their dignity. She took an empty house and found a couple who were willing to become house parents so that children who were actually living unhoused lives, having difficulty getting to their classes, could have a place with their parents' permission to stay during the week. There was a difference in our children's needs, and until all needs are met, equality is not possible. In 2021, the teen death rate in the US rose to 30 deaths per 100,000 children. This is the highest rate recorded since 2007 and represents increases in death by suicide, homicide, drug overdose, firearms, and traffic fatalities, all causes that can be positively impacted with aggressive political and social intervention. And yet, despite such alarming statistics, our nation's teen birth rate and the number of children living in abject poverty continue to decline, affirming the impact that effective policies, increased access to resources, and social programming can have on outcomes. We need not allow disappointing data to become our destiny. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. These are the words spoken by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King here in DC just 2 months before his assassination in Memphis. As we prepare to honor the legacy of Dr. King next week, these words echo across the decades as one of the most positive messages of the great civil rights leader's legacy, and we certainly need such hope in our current socio-political climate. The challenges that weigh us down today should never dissuade us from imagining a better, more just, and more love-filled future for our children and all of society. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau compiled by the Children's Defense Fund for their 2023 State of America Children's Report, the number of children in the U.S. continues to grow, reaching 74 million in 2021. That amounts to 22% of our nation's population. And because children typically do not live alone, care for these children represent care for families. The familial ecosystem suggests that every family is embedded in a set of nested external contexts that influences outcomes. For example, families living in neighborhoods in particular cities, in particular countries, have particular laws and values and norms. Factors at each level of context influence family dynamics. This is of particular relevance as we consider what is often referenced as the Browning of America. For the second consecutive year, children of color comprise over half of the children in the U.S., and half of all of those children of color live in just 5 states. The browning, however, is indicative of more than diverse skin tones. Beyond sociological constructs of race, the browning of America is indicative of cultural shifts as well. According to the American Immigration Council, 1 in 4 children in the U.S. have at least one immigrant parent, and roughly 6 million children under the age of 18 are living with an undocumented parent or caregiver. These changing demographics should affect how agencies and organizations in the United States engage in decision-making around the distribution of resources and services for millions of children and families. But why does any of this matter for the work that you are called to do? I am told that one of the most important tenets of professional social work is meeting clients where they are. I choose to believe all of the healing arts, a term I use expansively, share this tenet in common. We cannot help people from our social, physical, or emotional location. We must be willing to help them from where they are, physically, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. This is also broadly understood as a theological concept that is embedded in the notions of pastoral care. While I speak from a Christian context, I am not suggesting that the Christian church has any type of monopoly in this area. The well-being of children is a recognized tenet of every organized faith. And yet, I do not want to ignore the profound influence of professed Christianity on the policies and programs executed on behalf of children in the United States, especially in our current political landscape. The church has not been a consistent and collaborative advocate for children. Mainline Protestant churches support legislation to protect children's health and safety, but have been hesitant to contribute significantly to public debates about strengthening families. Evangelical and conservative churches tend to be more vocal on national debates about marriage and family, but these churches sometimes focus so narrowly on the rights of parents to raise their children without government intrusion that they inadequately address the collective responsibilities of parents, church, and state to protect and nurture the well-being of all children, regardless of and with respect for multiple religious, cultural, and social contexts. Even with self-identified progressive faiths, we too often fail in our commitment of child well-being. Children are lovingly referenced as gifts from God, investments in our future. While such references are well-intentioned, they can result in the categorization of children as subjects of our teaching and learning, rather than as complete human beings with agency and authority over their own bodies. Children also do not play a role in the way systematic theologians think about central theological themes, such as the nature of faith and language about God and the role of the church. Certainly, issues regarding children are addressed occasionally in theologic reflection on the family unit, but for the most part, church teaching simply admonishes parents to raise their children in the faith and children to obey their parents. And we have witnessed firsthand the possibilities for silencing and abuse when the human agency of children is not centered in religious teachings. While studies show populations becoming increasingly more disengaged from religious institutions, I believe it is a mistake to presume this shift diminishes the impact of religious indoctrination on social ecosystems and the work we are called to do together. As a registered nurse who served in both clinical and community settings for more than 25 years before entering ordained ministry, I know personally the need and impact of social workers on our society. I've seen firsthand the healing roles you play in people's systems, ranging from healthcare to schools to social welfare to community safety nets to academia and beyond. Hope is something the disciplines of social work and theology have in common. We all believe better is possible, and this belief, this confident expectation, is a driving force in the work we do and the service we offer. In 2009, Dr. Jeffrey Dung Andrade, Associate Professor of Latinx and Race Resistance at San Francisco State University, published an article in the Harvard Educational Review outlining 3 categories of hope that matter in social work. The first is material hope, which is the sense of control when given the resources to deal with forces that affect everyday lives. The second is Socratic hope, which provides opportunities to question injustice. The third is audacious hope, which provides opportunities for healing from oppression and the opportunity to transform it. Effective ministry also relies on 3 categories of hope, couched in a theology that professes a confident expectation that what God has promised shall come to pass, using framework introduced by Dr. Sean Jenwright, a professor of education in the Africana Studies Department at San Francisco State University. I use these 3 categories of hope in this moment. Relational hope, changing conditions with communities based on trust and relationship. Restorative hope, creating conditions and opportunities for communities to prosper and thrive. And political hope, engaging in political decisions in everyday lives to articulate opportunities to flourish. I believe I've found categories that are also reflective of theology in the public square. We certainly can see elements of these practices in the ministry of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. The building of communal trust through Dr. King's persistent presence in and within close proximity to those in pain. The affirmation of human agency actualized through boycotts and public protest. All of these are actions that were building blocks of hope. The poet Emily Dickinson describes this hope in a way that resonates so deeply with me in her poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers. She writes, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. In the spring of 1963, Time magazine ran a full coverage article on the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama. Included in the magazine was this centerfold image. It was a photo of several protesters, many of them children, held against brick walls and pavement by the force of water hoses used by Birmingham firefighters to push them back. The brute force of the water was evident even in the photo. But when I saw this picture in Time magazine, I decided that I had to have a copy for my archives because I was born in 1963, and it was not the photo. I can see that anywhere. But the caption on that centerfold said, "They fight a fire that will not go out." A fire that will not go out. The image for me is a reminder of the power of hope. The event moved President John F. Kennedy to express support for federal civil rights legislation and the eventual passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. What are you trying to say? I'm saying hope changes things. The shifts needed in our nation to prepare and protect our children today have not changed dramatically. Our singular efforts are not enough. We need concentration and collaboration. This past December, I had the opportunity to spend 31 days of my sabbatical in Cape Town, South Africa. There are two faces to the city of Cape Town. The world knows the face of the fun and beautiful world-class city with Table Mountain and great restaurants and beautiful beaches. The lesser engaged face of the city is where a significant portion of the city's population, 1/3 of the population, reside in marginalized communities, overcrowded townships, and underserviced informal settlements. According to the latest census data available as of 2023, around 18.2 million people in South Africa are living in extreme poverty, with the poverty threshold at $1.90. This represents an increase of 163,000 more people who entered poverty since 2022. 1 in 3 urban South African households are living below the established poverty level. And by 2030, over 19 million South Africans will live on a maximum of $1.90 a day. Despite racial integration in middle to higher income urban suburbs, the majority of poor Black households continue to live in peripheral, poorly located areas with insufficient access to opportunities and resources and long, expensive commutes to areas of employment. I'm talking about South Africa, but I don't have to be. There are places in U.S. that are just as bad. While on sabbatical, I spent time in these settlement communities with a religious-based justice organization in Cape Town called The Warehouse. The mission of The Warehouse is to support local congregations by enabling dialogue, facilitating collaboration, and inspiring hope-filled imagination towards justice-seeking action. It was during these visits that I was given the opportunity to observe the convergence of the healing arts in action. It is important to say that while The Warehouse is a religiously based organization, in this instance, theological framing was used as a base of spiritual support for congregants and not as an imposed mode of evangelism. The primary modality exercised in community was that of building hope. For Christian religious practitioners who focus their efforts towards those at the margins of social and economic life in South Africa, the poverty trap, entwined with multiple layers of disadvantage, arises from the interconnected web of systems that suppress opportunities and create hardship from the intersection of multiple deficiencies. This reality is certainly recognizable to us. The Warehouse uses frameworks of Latinx liberation theology fostered by voices like Dr. Justo Gutierrez, most well known for his foundational work, A Theology of Liberation, Catholic social teaching, and the writings of Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, to introduce a leadership training program centered around the pedagogical framework of the praxis cycle as a method of engagement in their diverse contexts across the city. The introduction of a praxis-based approach led those participants on a journey of self-reflection, social analysis, prophetic imagination, and planning for social transformation, which I had the honor of witnessing as they engaged a secondary learning community based in Khayelitsha, an informal settlement. This praxis-based approach did not begin with predetermined outcomes. Space was made for those most impacted to name their challenges and to propose their solutions. A key methodology in the teaching process was the exposure of participants to specialists reflecting multiple disciplines such as academics, community members, urban geographers, sociologists, systematic theologians, city planners, community activists, as conversation partners instead of decision makers. Part of the richness came from the gathering of diverse practitioners. And what I loved about this is that we would often start in the wealthiest suburbs of Cape Town and drive together from the wealthiest suburbs through the middle class suburbs to the lower class suburbs to abject poverty where we would then meet. It was a tangible reminder that we are not all living the same story. We don't all have the same challenges. And as somebody said to me once, we may be in the same storm, but we sure enough are not in the same boat. Part of this richness helped me to understand that the experiences of everyone matters because no one is a better expert on their lives than the people who are living it. It is an experience that revolutionized my thinking about how ministry can best partner with communities and social services to positively and permanently impact families in the margins of our society. The invitation to not only engage, but lead one's own journey to well-being is hope-filled. If we can break away from the dominant narratives long enough to ask, what do we want our children and our communities to become? Fresh possibilities can open up to explore and employ educational practices that shape transformative thinkers. The theological education called for here is the kind of vocational preparation that can assist students to interact with complex challenges faced by marginalized individuals and communities. Reimagined epistemologies and pedagogies are needed to unlock potential and invigorate the spirituality of practitioners in ways that will equip us to revitalize communities of faith while also energizing and mobilizing those who are marginalized in our cities and in our rural areas. A theological training model offered there at the University of Pretoria is offering fresh possibilities to root theological education in urban realities through engagement in a praxis-based pedagogical approach. The emancipatory nature of the praxis cycle framework creates space for theological inquiry in tension with self-reflection, social analysis, spiritual formation, and theological reflection leading to new actions. Engagement with a praxis-based approach brought a deep level of discomfort. The process forced consideration of the pervasive role of systemic injustice in perpetuating poverty and marginalization for so many people. For me, it reminded me of my time as a nurse when I did critical care nursing. Combined with my time selling pharmaceuticals, I've done a lot of things. I began to understand that we are wired in such a way that we respond greatly to crisis and we ignore conditions. I sold Plavix. Anybody know what Plavix is? It's a gold mine. I sold Plavix. And if you came into the hospital having a heart attack, that's a crisis. You would immediately be given Plavix, taken to the back, because everyone understands that the quicker they can stop the attack, the better chance they have of restoring you to your pre-heart attack condition. It's a crisis. But if you come into the emergency room with congestive heart failure, that's a condition. You can die from both, but we accept that congestive heart failure will never change. Therefore, we give you the medications to maintain your illness. If you come into the hospital with a stroke, immediately you're taken to the back for anticoagulants. If we can dissolve the clots, there's a chance that all your mobility and your cognitive functions will return. But if you come in with hypertension, we accept that condition. And therefore, we only give you medicine to maintain your blood pressure at a level that you can live with. This is not just true in medicine, it is true in community. I remember after Michael Brown died, we had a bad winter. And because everyone had been in the streets, we were very cognizant of the number of unhoused people who had always been there, but we had not always seen. This particular winter, the city of St. Louis did not have adequate resources for the unhoused. They had closed the largest shelter without an alternative. And churches began to open their doors so that people did not have to stay outside in the harsh cold. There were restaurants who opened up their backs for warehouses for people to bring supplies so we could take care of the unhoused. And an emergency call went out saying we did not have enough supplies. I, for the first time in my life, opened a GoFundMe page. I did a GoFundMe and asked people to give so that I could give money to these places that were housing the unhoused. It was an emergency. Within 3 hours, I had raised $10,000. I was shocked. That was all I asked for, so I upped it a little bit. Within a few more hours, I'd hit $15,000. And by the end of the day, I was closing in on $20,000. I received a message from Facebook saying this is a private donation, and if you hit $20,000, you will be taxed on all of this money. I shut the GoFundMe down and gave addresses of how people could use them, and then I went to get my money from Facebook to take it for these emergencies, only to find out that Facebook had a waiting period on GoFundMes. Not a few-hour waiting period. I calculated it would be about a month. As a matter of fact, it might be spring before I could show up with these emergency funds. I was a pastor who was trusted, and my church decided to give me the money and wait on theirs. I showed up at the first place with this money, apologizing that I had not been there the day before. I know you need it, they said. I said, and I'm sorry I'm late. Mo, who owned this particular diner, said, just calm down. We're actually okay. Go look in the back. It was filled to the brim with canned goods and blankets and coats. She said, we don't need another thing right now, but we will need your money in a few months. What do you mean? I said. She said, well, right now it's a crisis, and everybody shows up to a crisis. Right now, we're overflowing because everybody shows up to a crisis. But in March, the weather will break. Spring will come. there won't be a need for blankets and coats, but people will still be hungry. And all the people who showed up for crisis will not show up then. What this praxis model in South Africa showed me was a way to look at conditions as crisis. The strength of the model is in the way it helps those who are closest to the proximity of pain to examine their realities and decide on their solutions. Increasingly, people who come to these sessions become collaborators in their own destiny. The circle of praxis approach lends itself to this collaboration because it is not a one-time thing. It is a continuous sequence of 4 related movements of action and reflection. First, immersion, then social analysis, then theological reflection, and then community planning. The praxis-based approach provides a pedagogical style that leads practitioners to consider the whole of life and the social systems that are interwoven in urban ministry contexts as a transformative paradigm. In the tradition of Paulo Freire, the praxis cycle promotes an educational process rooted in problem posing and dialogue, helping to awaken the critical consciousness of the entire community, including our children. Now, I am a preacher, so I cannot help but close with scripture. In the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus is concluding a lesson on community norms. And after the teaching, parents began to bring their children for prayer. But the disciples object. After all, why should Jesus be bothered with children? But Jesus says, let the children come, and don't hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Perhaps it was not only an invitation for children to come and receive a blessing, but rather to come always, to come fully, to come and participate, to come and be heard, to come in all the ways that make us better together, to come to pose questions, to come to solve problems. Then perhaps when the question is asked, "Que serían angere?" and how are the children, we will one day be able to reply, the children, all of the children are well. Thank you.
So I recognize that we stand between you and possibly a glass of wine and a snack, but I did want to provide an opportunity if anyone had a question for Reverend Blackmon to ask that, and we can spend a couple of minutes doing that, and then we'll adjourn and head to the reception. So there are 2 microphones if anyone has one. I see Claudette going to a microphone over there.
Everybody can laugh. No. Thank you very much for presenting what I would consider to be a kind of global ecology of hope. We do a very good job of being individualist about hope in the United States. How do we work together to get beyond thinking upon our individual will in our individual ways to promote an ecology of hope that benefits all of us?
Thank you for that question, and I would be very wealthy if I had the answer. But I'm going to share some practices that I have begun doing on my own. I agree with you that we in the U.S. are very insular thinking. For instance, it was a shift even in language to begin talking about Black people, people of color, as the global majority instead of the minority. I am suggesting that we spend more time as academicians, as theologians, as social workers, looking at the broader picture. I chose South Africa because it was a different environment than the US, and I learned quite a bit there, not just based on the academic work, but also based on just the interrelational work and how things are seen by people who are looking from a different context. When I do diversity trainings, I often start with a simple exercise to remind people that we look through a narrow lens. I give transparencies. I'm dating myself. Many of you probably don't even know what transparencies are. But I give transparencies out and transparent markers and invite people to draw their life map on a transparency, just a glimmer of their life, whatever they choose to do. And then when they introduce themselves, I have them hold up that transparency and speak through it as a reminder that they are speaking through a particular lens. And when they have a partner that does the same and they both hold them up, it is a reminder that we have to go through much individualism before we can have common conversation. I don't know how to make the whole world do that, but we would be better off if we did. There are parts of this praxis that I chose to skip over because I know what it means to stand between people and their break. So I will give Kirk the full presentation, and you're welcome to it if you like.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your time today. My question kind of builds off the last. I also have done time in ministry and also in social work. My question would be, what are your recommendations on how to marry the two? Because I've tried to engage in a lot of faith-based initiatives, and there's always a disconnect. And a lot of times it comes from social workers being thought as being too liberal for certain denominations and things like that. And I think it's really important, and I think there is a wealth of that it could be beneficial bi-directionally for that to be a great relationship. But I've been in the Bible Belt my whole life, so of course, that's a thing. So what are your suggestions on really trying to get social workers in faith-based communities, and then also the inverse, because especially with a lot of public service, we try to give out different things in churches just with closed doors on us, or some social work schools or some social work organizations won't allow certain churches because of their viewpoints. We can't change people's theological views overnight, but I still feel like there's a way to us to collaborate to serve people. How can we do that?
Thank you for that. I'm sure that there are places where I would be called a heretic, so you might want to ask somebody else. I operate, and I say publicly, and as a pastor, I said often, I believe that the Bible is a people's book about a holy God and not God's book about a holy people. I say that often because it matters that if it's a people's book about a holy God, then I can begin to help people deconstruct notions of chosenness that suggest that God favors some people over others. This is work of theology. It is It is not social work's issue. It is the work of ministers who stand in pulpits every Sunday, who know better and who choose not to do better. And as long as we have that going on, then we limit our ability to create congregations of thinking people of faith. So for almost every instance that you can name that comes up in a Bible Belt that people have something against, there are ways to use text faithfully that point to a Jesus who does not have that issue in the Christian context. I'm using Christian context because we are the most oppressive in some ways, and we are dominant here. So you can't change people's thoughts, but people live real lives no matter what they say. And I'll share this story with you. I used to be on the board of Planned Parenthood. And the last day of my orientation at Planned Parenthood, every time I would go for orientation, there would be protesters outside. And I'm not making a judgment about that. There would be protesters outside. My very last day, it was a week-long orientation, and I was so glad to be done. And when I closed that binder, I thought I was ready to go. And the president of that association, Paula Giuliani, she's not there anymore, she said, "Wait, there's one more thing you have to know." And she said to me, "Every time you come in here, you've passed protesters." I said, "Yes." She said, "And we told you not to engage them, just come and park." I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, what you need to know is occasionally people you see out there, you will see in here. And when you see them in here, you must treat them the same way that you treat everyone else who walks through this door. And the next day, when you see them back outside, calling you names and talking about you, you must never let anyone know that you saw them inside. If you can't do that, you can't serve." I offer that because so much of what we don't tell is what people are living with every day. And I found in ministry, if you just stay authentic and tell the truth, then people will understand you are a place they can come. And we won't change up here. We'll begin to change down here.
I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up this evening. Jennifer, we are finished, correct? Thank you. Thank you, Traci, for your words and for being with us.